Hey crew, hope you are well. Today I am talking about post-workout nutrition and we are going to be covering fat. Now commonly fat is advised that we actually want to reduce fat in our post-workout meal. So I'm going to just talk through some of the common things why this is advised and actually do we need to be worrying about reducing our fat intake post-workout. Like this is something that we do with our coaching clients. We have a training meal, anytime meal system, and our training meal is actually lower fat. It's not no fat, it's just slightly lower. Now, the reason for this, the reason why it is advised to reduce the fat post-workout is it potentially delays glycogen replenishment. Now, inherently this is true, okay, but do we need to really be worrying about it when we're training maybe once a day? Or even splitting our sessions between like 10 hours, okay, morning and evening. So much of the research out there shows that in a 24-hour period, there is no difference in terms of glycogen replenishment, no matter how much fat. I think one of the research studies stuck 160 grams of fat in, post-workout over different periods, and it didn't matter between 100% carbohydrate meal or solution to having fat in a post-workout meal in a 24-hour period. So it doesn't matter, guys, in terms of, if you're training once a day or, 5 times a week or whatever. What it does matter if you are trying to do it in a competition or something like this. So this is a scenario there where you might kind of want to reduce fat in your post-workout meal. Also, we very rarely deplete all of our glycogen in a single session. So maximizing our glycogen replenishment is not really needed. Yes, the research is talking about the optimal thing to do, but we don't really need to worry about it because we might even in a really tough session, might be depleting maybe 60% of our muscle and liver glycogen, but even then, you still got 40% and you're going to be, have plenty of time to replenish before the next session. It's not just about that post-workout window. So adding fat in there post-workout, don't necessarily need to worry about it. Blunting insulin, okay, so insulin spike post-workout. Useful tactic to, throw insulin through the ceiling and replenish all of our energy that we've depleted. Again, look at the bigger picture. You don't need to be worrying about spiking insulin if you're not going to be training within the next 2 to 3 hours or 4 hours. So putting fat in there will potentially blunt insulin in that first phase. So insulin spiking is like biphasic. So there's like a short phase, 30 to 60 minutes, and then a kind of slower phase where it's still potentially kind of elevated. That first phase can happen regardless of insulin, okay? It doesn't, of carbohydrates. So you don't need to worry about that initial period of fat potentially blunting it from if you're having carbohydrates and fats. It happens independently, okay? So don't worry about that unless you're training like, more competitive athlete and you're maybe got 2-3 hours before your next session. Maybe interferes with muscle protein synthesis. This is another thing that maybe, that people potentially remove fat in that post-workout period. It doesn't, okay? It really, really doesn't. It might interfere with muscle protein synthesis due to blunting the insulin spike slightly. But it's also, we want to be looking at muscle protein breakdown, okay? And we only need a very, very small increase in insulin to prevent this, okay? So even with fat, you're still going to get that small insulin spike. So hopefully that kind of allays some fears about, 3 of the main reasons why we are being told to reduce fat. So it doesn't really matter about this. So what if you're only training once a day, okay? What if you feel really, really hungry after your post-workout meal? This is something that we see commonly, okay? Like training once a day, but when you eat post-workout, because we've been told to eat protein and carbohydrates, you're actually hungry like an hour later. You shovel your oats in or you have your, your bagel or whatever, and then an hour later you're starving, okay? What about if we included some fat in that post-workout meal? We know it delays gastric emptying, okay? We know that it potentially kind of has a better, a more manageable thing on blood glucose levels. So if we're looking at, well, I'm not going to be training for the next day, or maybe I'm having the rest day the next day, Do I really need to be concerning myself about spiking my insulin levels and shoving a load of, maximising my glycogen replenishment? No. What I want to do is think about managing my intake better so that I don't reach for the cookie jar at 10:30 in the morning. Or I'm post-workout in the evening, I'm not kind of raiding the fridge at 9:30 at night because an hour after my dinner, I'm super hungry. So we could use fat post-workout in some scenarios. Maybe that would be a useful tactic to keep us on plan. Another one that I wanted to talk about is people that are trying to gain muscle. Okay, so trying to put on a bit of size and strength. Now we need to be in a calorie surplus at certain times, and often people struggle to hit the required calories that they need. How about using some fat in that post-workout meal? Okay, we want to be thinking about, well, actually calories are the most important thing. Overall intake is the most important thing, opposed to nutrient timing. So how about putting in some fat post-workout? Eggs are really great. Just because they've got fat in doesn't mean that we can't have them post-workout. So guys, thinking about like the overall picture is what I want you to be taking away from this video, okay? It doesn't matter. 24-hour period, there's so much research out there. Glycogen replenishment is not affected, okay? It does have a slight effect on insulin, but it doesn't. Do we really need to be worried about that if we're training once a day? Probably not. And we don't worry about muscle protein synthesis, because if we are eating protein consistently across the day, if we're eating enough calories to support our performance, then we'll be absolutely fine. Nutrient timing is the cherry on the top, but I don't want you to be scared of including fat post-workout. If eggs work for you and you make you feel good and you like to eat them, and you train in the morning, then absolutely have them post-workout. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry, I'm only gonna have an egg white omelette. Like, no, you can include these. Don't worry about it, okay? So looking at maybe including fat in certain scenarios to help you manage your intake is something that I think can be really, really useful. So I will be writing a more scientific article on this for all the geeks out there that want all the references, so hold tight for that. Pop any questions in the comments, and I'm more than happy to guide you in the right direction on some of the stuff I've been reading recently.